Welcome back to Upside Down Data. Let's talk about a realistic price prediction for Beam. So if you're not familiar, Beam is the token for Merit Circle, which is a project that's all about blockchain gaming. They're basically trying to incubate a whole bunch of different crypto projects. Projects can build on top of them. And so they stand to really do well if the crypto gaming space does well also. So Beam is an asset that has done quite well since it launched. So from its initial launch just back here in November of 23 to where we are now, it's up 700%, over 700%. It was up almost 1,000% from that point at the high. Quite impressive indeed. But that is what happened in the past. I think what a lot of people are curious about is where might it go in the future? If we really are in the middle of a full bull market, how much higher could Beam realistically go? Now, a lot of other people will just draw lines on a chart and just give some subjective evaluation of where they think it's going to go. But that isn't really all that meaningful in my opinion. It's not based on anything. It's just someone's opinion. I like to take a data-driven approach. And so if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know that I like to take a simulation and machine learning-based approach to answer these questions about price predictions. So let's go ahead and get into that. Okay, so the first step of the approach that I like to take is to build a machine learning based model to get a rough idea or a decently good idea of where Beam's price should be at some point in the future based on some inputs. So this is a model that takes as input time, the price of Bitcoin, and the price of Ethereum as being the predictors. Now, why do I do it this way? Well, when it comes to crypto, if you know where Bitcoin is and if you know where Ethereum is, you'll generally know where other assets are. They tend to be quite correlated with those assets. And so if you know how Bitcoin and Ethereum are moving, you'll probably know how other assets should be expected to move as well. And then time is just kind of a catch-all variable that anything that's not explained by the price of Bitcoin or Ethereum in the movements of Beam can be subsumed or accounted for in that time variable, or at least a decent subset of them. And so even though Beam is a very young asset, you can see this model does a good idea of giving us a sense of when it's relatively overvalued, relatively undervalued, and generally speaking, where it should more or less be expected to be. But really the value of this is not to say that this model is going to give you the exact price of Beam at any given point in time. In fact, you don't want it to do that because that would suggest an overfit model that's not going to be very predictive of things in the future. Rather, it's there so that you can ask it questions to get an idea of what might be plausible in different types of scenarios. And that's really what this approach is all about. We can basically say in a hypothetical world where we're at some date in the future and we're at some Bitcoin price and we're at some Ethereum price, where would you expect a reasonable price of Beam to be at that point? It doesn't mean the price would be exactly there, but generally around there, somewhere in that general vicinity. And so we can see that in this more bullish scenario, perhaps in a bull market, or reasonably bullish, we can see that the predicted price would be 60 cents, which would be extremely bullish for Beam relative to where it is right now. Now, in a bit less of a bullish scenario, where we have these sets of inputs, it would be lower, still bullish, but lower. Now, obviously, when you look at this, you might say, okay, but why should we care about these specific inputs? Why do we think these are the ones to care about versus other ones? And I would answer, we shouldn't. These are not by any means the two that we should care about. And in fact, the better approach, and the one that I'm going to talk about and focus on here, is a simulation-based approach, where basically what we do is we pick realistic values from realistic ranges of inputs for each of those different inputs into the model. So the price of Bitcoin, let's say, for example, that in this bull market, we're somewhere between the all-time high that I just recently put in, 73K, and somewhere about 5 times its prior all-time high of 69K. Then with Ethereum, kind of a similar idea, somewhere between 4.8, 28.8K, somewhere in that general ballpark. And in terms of time, I think most people would expect this bull market to run its course somewhere in the ballpark of midway through this year, if it was a pretty kind of early peaking cycle, or maybe if it's a really long and extended cycle, somewhere in the middle of 2026. So that's kind of the general ballpark that's going to be sampling from. And so basically then what you do is you randomly pick a value from each of these ranges. You then feed it into the model and see what it predicts the price of Beam would be at that given situation. And then you record that predicted price and you do it again and again and again 10,000 times. And what that gives you is a distribution of predicted prices within these realistic ranges or realistic situations for a bull market. And so you can do that is you can look at descriptive statistics or summary statistics of that distribution. So you can look at something like, what is the average predicted price of Beam in those different bull market scenarios? And we see here 80 cents, quite bullish relative to where it currently is. Median price 70 cents, again, quite bullish. And then we have our 10th percentile and our 90th percentile. This is just basically to give you a sense of 10% of the simulations fell below this price, 10% fell above this price, which means that 80% fall between these values. So we can also then just look at it in terms of a distribution. So that's where we are here. So what you can see is that overall it's a bit of a skewed distribution. That just means that there are some simulations that are extremely bullish and really push you way out to really high levels. That's why the mean is skewed a little bit up this way relative to the median, which is kind of that middle price. But generally speaking, these are quite bullish numbers. But let's put it into context then. So we can look at the distribution, see what that looks like. Let's imagine that Beam were to go ahead and hit its median value or its mean value. Where would that actually take us on the price chart? So let's just go ahead and flip over where I've now mapped these out. And you can see that getting up to around that median value would be about 1900% move to the upside from current levels. Quite nice. And then the mean value would be about 2.2K move to the upside, 2200% move to the upside. Very nice indeed. Now, is it at all guaranteed by any means that Beam's going to get to these values? No, absolutely not. Remember, there's the distribution, which includes values that are significantly lower than this in different scenarios, and also values that are notably higher than this. But these are those central tendencies that if you had to pick a number, you'd probably pick a number somewhere around these numbers based on those simulations. But by no means is it a guarantee we can get there. But the nice thing about this is it gives us a range of plausible values. That instead of just picking a number or just using someone's objective opinion of where they think it might go based on almost nothing, this gives us a data-driven answer of what is a plausible prediction for Beam's price in different plausible bull market scenarios. This is a data-driven approach to get to that answer. And so if we do end up going to full bull market and Beam does rally to way higher levels, what this can also do is help to ground us to say, okay, if we're getting up to these levels, should we just think that it's going to continue to go up, 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 up only, like a lot of people would claim it would? You better imagine that if Beam went ripping to these levels, people would just say, oh, this is the new paradigm. It's never going to go down again. It's just going to keep on going up, up, up only. That oftentimes happens when you're actually in a dangerous position. So having this in the back of one's mind can be useful to calibrate in those scenarios. And again, these are relatively bullish projections. There's no guarantee we get there. Again, this is the median value here. Half of the simulations fell below this, so there's no guarantee we get there. But it is that central tendency, and it gives us a much more useful guide, in my opinion, or at least hypothesis, than people just randomly picking numbers. Now, obviously, this is not financial advice. You should make your own opinions, you evaluate this data as you will, make your own decisions. But I like to do this, and I think it's a useful exercise just for these reasons we're talking about. It helps to ground ourselves and give us some hypotheses that we can test as we might continue in this bull market. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us over on X. A lot of updates for our models and more over there. And you can go to our website, polaritydigital.io, link in the description, to see live data from our models and more.